Mother Bear rocked a NICU chair until dawn for a tiny fighter. What happened next was shocking. Let us know where you're watching from. If you love my content, consider supporting it with a super thanks. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. It'll help us to remain in touch with amazing people like you. The rain hammered against the windows of St. Mary's Children's Hospital with such force that even the thick glass seemed to tremble. Inside the neonatal intensive care unit, the sound was muffled but constant, like a heartbeat that refused to stop. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a pale, cold glow that made the white walls look almost blue. Nurse Clara Winters had been working the night shift for 7 years, but tonight felt different. Something in the air made her skin prickle, though she couldn't explain why. She moved between the tiny incubators with practiced silence, checking monitors and adjusting tubes that kept the smallest fighters alive. Each baby here was a miracle wrapped in uncertainty. In the corner of the room sat an old wooden rocking chair that had been donated years ago by a grateful family. Most nights it remained empty, but sometimes parents would sit there for hours, watching over their children. Tonight, like most nights this week, it sat vacant. The chair had a strange quality about it. It would creak softly even when no one was near it, as if moved by invisible hands. Room 7 needs another blanket check, Clara whispered to herself, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of machines. As she approached the incubator, her heart clenched the way it always did when she looked at baby Brooks. The tiny girl had been born 3 months early, weighing just over 2 pounds. Her parents, Rebecca and David Brooks, had been taking shifts staying with her, but exhaustion had finally forced them home for a few hours of rest. The baby's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. Her little fist was no bigger than a walnut, fingers so small they could barely wrap around Clara's pinky. The monitors showed her vitals were stable, but Clara had learned not to trust stability in the NICU. Things could change in seconds. Outside, beyond the hospital parking lot, stretched the dense Millbrook forest. Most people in town avoided the woods, especially at night. There had been stories recently, hikers reporting strange sounds, park rangers finding trees marked with deep claw scratches. The local news had mentioned increased bear activity, but Clara had never given it much thought. The hospital felt like its own world, separate from whatever dangers lurked in the darkness beyond. As Clara finished her rounds, she noticed something odd. The rocking chair in the corner was moving ever so slightly, back and forth in a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate. She stopped and stared at it, waiting for it to still, but it continued its gentle motion. The air conditioning couldn't be causing it. The vents were on the opposite side of the room. She walked closer to investigate, her soft-soled shoes making no sound on the polished floor. As she reached out to steady the chair, a sound from outside made her freeze. It was low and deep, almost like a moan, but different from anything she'd heard before. The sound seemed to come from the direction of the forest, carried on the wind and rain. Clara looked toward the windows, but the darkness outside was complete. The exterior lights illuminated only a small circle of the parking lot before being swallowed by the night. She shook her head and decided she was letting her imagination run wild. Night shifts had a way of making ordinary things seem mysterious, but as she turned back to her duties, she could have sworn she saw a massive shadow moving between the trees at the forest's edge. It was there for just a moment, then gone, leaving her wondering if she'd seen anything at all. The rocking chair continued its gentle motion, as if waiting for someone to claim it. 20 minutes passed, and Clara found herself glancing at the chair more frequently than she cared to admit. Each time she looked, it was still rocking, that same steady rhythm that seemed almost hypnotic. She tried to focus on her paperwork, updating charts and recording vital signs, but her eyes kept drifting back to that corner of the room. Baby Brooks stirred in her incubator, making the tiny mewing sounds that premature babies often made. Clara immediately moved to her side, checking the monitors. The baby's heart rate had increased slightly, not enough to be alarming, but enough to be noticeable. Her little eyes were moving beneath closed lids as if she were dreaming. "What are you seeing in there, little one?" Clara whispered, gently adjusting the baby's position. As she did, she noticed something that made her breath catch. There, on the outside of the incubator's glass, was what looked like a handprint. But it was too large to be human, and the fingers were too thick, too long. The print was foggy, as if made by warm breath against cold glass. Clara stared at the print, her heart beginning to race. She looked around the room, but she was completely alone. The other babies were sleeping peacefully, their monitors beeping softly in the background. She reached out to touch the glass where the print was, and her finger came away slightly damp. The sound came again from outside, that low, mournful moan that seemed to echo through the walls. This time it was closer, much closer. Clara moved to the window and pressed her face against the glass, trying to see into the darkness. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars belonging to the night staff. Beyond that, the tree line of Millbrook Forest stood like a wall of black. As she watched, something moved in the shadows between the trees. It was massive, easily 7 feet tall when standing on its hind legs. Clara's breath fogged the window as she realized what she was seeing. A bear. A huge brown bear was standing at the edge of the forest, looking directly at the hospital building. But that wasn't the strangest part. The bear wasn't acting like a wild animal. It stood perfectly still, almost human-like in its posture. And its eyes, even from this distance, Clara could see its eyes reflecting the parking lot lights. They seemed focused, intelligent, as if the bear was studying the building with purpose. Clara's hands trembled as she reached for the phone to call security. But before she could dial, the bear dropped to all fours and began moving across the parking lot. Not running or charging, but walking with deliberate steps toward the hospital entrance. Its massive paws made no sound on the wet pavement, and it moved with a grace that seemed impossible for such a large creature. "This can't be happening," Clara whispered to herself. She quickly dialed the security office, her fingers fumbling with the numbers. "Security, this is Marcus," a sleepy voice answered. "Marcus, this is Clara in the NICU. There's a bear in the parking lot and it's heading toward the building." There was a pause. "A what now?" "A bear, Marcus. A huge bear. It's walking toward the main entrance." "Clara, are you feeling okay? Maybe you need to take a break. Night shifts can mess with your head sometimes." Clara looked out the window again. The parking lot was empty. The bear was gone. She scanned the entire area, but there was no sign of the massive creature she'd just seen. I'm sorry, Marcus. Maybe you're right. I think I just need some coffee." "No problem. We all have those nights. Call if you need anything." Clara hung up the phone, but she knew what she'd seen. The bear had been real. The question was, where had it gone? She turned back to check on the babies and froze. The rocking chair was no longer empty. Sitting in it was the largest bear Clara had ever seen, even larger than the one she'd spotted outside. Its thick brown fur was damp from the rain, and water dripped steadily onto the floor around the chair. The bear was rocking slowly, its massive arms draped over the chair's armrests, its deep brown eyes fixed on baby Brooks's incubator. Clara's scream caught in her throat. Every instinct told her to run, to call for help, to do something. But she found herself frozen, unable to move or speak. The bear turned its massive head toward her, and their eyes met across the room. What Clara saw in those eyes wasn't the wild fury of a dangerous animal. It was something else entirely. Pain, loss, a deep, aching sadness that seemed to reach right into her chest and squeeze her heart. The bear's expression was almost human in its grief, and Clara felt tears beginning to form in her own eyes. The bear made a soft sound, not quite a growl, but something gentler. It sounded almost like a mother humming to soothe a crying child. Then it turned its attention back to baby Brooks, who had become completely still in her incubator. The baby's monitors showed her heart rate had actually decreased to a more normal level, as if the bear's presence was somehow calming her. Clara found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "How did you get in here?" The bear didn't look at her this time, but continued its gentle rocking. Water from its fur had pooled around the chair, forming small puddles that reflected the overhead lights. The air in the room had changed. It smelled of rain and forest, of earth and something wild yet comforting. Minutes passed in absolute silence, except for the soft creaking of the rocking chair and the steady beeping of the medical equipment. Clara realized she was no longer afraid. There was something about the bear's demeanor, something about the way it looked at baby Brooks with such tender attention, that made her feel this was not a threat. Slowly, Clara began to approach the bear. Each step felt like it took forever, but the creature showed no signs of aggression. If anything, it seemed to welcome her presence. When she was close enough to touch the chair, the bear turned its massive head toward her again. Up close, Clara could see details that made her heart ache. There were old scars along the bear's muzzle, and its left ear had a notch torn from it. But most striking were its eyes. They held an intelligence and sorrow that seemed almost human. This was a mother who had lost something precious. "You've lost a baby too, haven't you?" Clara whispered. The bear's response was a low rumble that vibrated through the floor. It wasn't threatening. It sounded almost like agreement. The bear then did something that would stay with Clara for the rest of her life. It reached out one enormous paw and gently touched the glass of baby Brooks's incubator, exactly where the mysterious handprint had appeared earlier. Baby Brooks turned her tiny head toward the bear's paw, and for a moment, it seemed as if she could see through the glass to the gentle giant keeping watch over her. The baby's hand moved, pressing against the inside of the glass directly opposite the bear's paw. Clara felt tears streaming down her face as she watched this impossible moment of connection between species, between two souls who seemed to understand each other's pain and hope. The bear's rumbling grew softer, taking on the rhythm of a lullaby, and baby Brooks's breathing became deeper and more relaxed than Clara had seen since the baby's arrival. The monitors showed something remarkable. All of baby Brooks's vital signs were improving. Her oxygen saturation was better, her heart rate was strong and steady, and her brain activity patterns on the EEG were more stable than they'd been in weeks. But Clara's wonder was interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway outside the NICU. Someone was coming, and she knew that whoever it was would not understand what they were about to see. The bear seemed to sense it too, lifting its massive head to listen. The footsteps grew closer, and Clara could hear the familiar squeak of Dr. Helena Voss's shoes on the polished floor. Dr. Voss was the head of the NICU, a brilliant but stern woman who had dedicated her life to saving premature babies. She often made rounds at odd hours, checking on the most critical cases. Clara looked at the bear with panic in her eyes. "You have to go," she whispered urgently. "If she sees you, they'll call animal control, maybe even shoot you." The bear's deep brown eyes met hers, and for a moment, Clara felt as if it was trying to communicate something important. The creature made that same soft rumbling sound, but this time it seemed different, more urgent, almost pleading. The footsteps stopped just outside the door. Clara could see Dr. Voss's shadow under the gap at the bottom of the door as she paused to check something on her tablet. Clara had maybe 30 seconds before the doctor entered, but the bear didn't move. Instead, it reached into what looked like a pouch in its thick fur, something Clara hadn't noticed before. From this hidden space, the bear withdrew something that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. It was a tiny knitted blanket, no bigger than a washcloth, made from soft brown yarn that matched the color of the bear's fur. The blanket was clearly handmade, with small imperfections that spoke of loving hands working by lamplight. But what made Clara's heart break was that the blanket was sized for something much smaller than a human baby. It was made for a bear cub. The bear held the blanket gently in its massive paws and pressed it against the glass of baby Brooks's incubator, right next to where the baby's tiny hand was still pressed against the inside. The bear's eyes filled with what could only be described as tears, large, glistening drops that rolled down its furry cheeks. "Oh my God," Clara whispered, understanding flooding through her. "You made this for your own baby, didn't you?" The bear's rumble was so soft it was barely audible, but Clara felt it in her bones. It was the sound of a mother's grief, raw and infinite. The creature had lost its own cub and had somehow been drawn to this place where other mothers' babies fought for life. The door handle turned. Dr. Voss was about to enter. But something miraculous happened. The bear didn't disappear or run away. Instead, it seemed to fade, becoming translucent like morning mist. Clara could see through its form to the rocking chair behind it. Yet the chair continued to rock as if the bear's weight was still there. The tiny blanket, however, remained solid and real, pressed against the incubator's glass. Dr. Voss entered the room, her sharp eyes immediately scanning the NICU with practiced efficiency. "Clara, I saw the light was on. Everything all right in here?" Clara's mouth moved, but no sound came out. She stared at the rocking chair, which was still moving gently back and forth, though now it appeared empty to Dr. Voss's eyes. The bear was still there. Clara could see its faint outline, feel its presence, but somehow it had become invisible to others. "Clara?" Dr. Voss stepped closer, concern creeping into her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Baby Brooks," Clara managed to say, pointing to the incubator. "Her vitals have improved dramatically in the last hour." Dr. Voss immediately moved to check the monitors, her demeanor shifting into professional mode. As she studied the readings, her eyebrows rose in surprise. "This is remarkable," she murmured, adjusting her glasses to read the numbers more carefully. "Her oxygen saturation is the best it's been since admission. Heart rate is strong and steady. Brain activity patterns are—" She paused, looking confused. "These readings are almost like those of a full-term baby. That's impossible." Clara watched as Dr. Voss noticed the small blanket pressed against the incubator's glass. The doctor frowned and carefully picked it up, examining it closely. "Where did this come from?" Dr. Voss asked, holding up the tiny knitted blanket. "It's not standard hospital issue, and it's too small for any of our babies." Clara could see the bear's translucent form lean forward in the rocking chair, watching Dr. Voss handle the blanket with intense interest. The bear's eyes were fixed on the doctor's face, as if trying to read her reaction. I don't know," Clara said truthfully. "I found it there when I came to check on her." Dr. Voss held the blanket up to the light, examining the stitching. "This is exquisite handiwork. Look at these tiny stitches, the attention to detail. Someone spent hours making this." She paused, running her fingers over the soft yarn. "It's still warm." The bear in the rocking chair made that soft rumbling sound again, but Dr. Voss didn't seem to hear it. Only Clara could perceive the grieving mother's presence. "The strangest thing," Dr. Voss continued, still examining the blanket, "is that it smells like the forest. Like pine trees and rain." She looked at Clara with puzzled eyes. "Have you been outside recently?" "No, I've been here all night," Clara replied, her voice barely steady. Dr. Voss carefully placed the blanket on a nearby counter and returned to studying Baby Brooks's monitors. "I want to run some additional tests. These improvements are so significant that I need to document them properly." She turned to Clara. "Has anything unusual happened tonight? Any changes in routine, different medications, anything at all?" Clara's eyes flicked to the still rocking chair where the bear's ghostly form continued its gentle vigil. "Nothing out of the ordinary," she said, the lie heavy on her tongue. As Dr. Voss busied herself with taking notes and preparing for additional tests, something extraordinary began to happen. Other babies in the NICU, who had been restless or crying softly, began to settle into peaceful sleep. The entire room filled with a sense of calm that Clara had never experienced in her 7 years of working here. Baby Martinez, who had been struggling with feeding issues, began to breathe more easily. Baby Chen, who had been fighting an infection, showed improved color in his tiny face. Even Baby Williams, who had been the most critical case in the unit, displayed steadier vital signs than he had in days. Dr. Voss noticed it too. She moved from incubator to incubator, checking readings with growing amazement. "This is unprecedented," she whispered to herself. "It's as if something is healing all of them simultaneously." The bear's form became slightly more visible to Clara, and she could see tears still flowing down its furry cheeks. But now they seemed to be tears of joy rather than pure grief. The creature was witnessing something beautiful. Its presence was helping not just Baby Brooks, but all the tiny fighters in the NICU. Clara realized she was witnessing something that defied every scientific explanation she'd ever learned. This mother bear, who had lost her own cub, had somehow found a way to channel her maternal love into healing human babies. The grief that could have consumed her had instead transformed into something miraculous. But Dr. Voss was a woman of science, and Clara could see her struggling to find logical explanations for what she was observing. "I need to call Dr. Peterson," Dr. Voss said, referring to the chief of pediatrics. "These improvements are so remarkable that they need to be documented and studied. This could change how we approach neonatal care." As Dr. Voss reached for her phone, the bear's form began to solidify again, becoming more visible. Clara realized with growing alarm that the creature's ability to remain hidden was weakening. The emotional strain of being so close to suffering babies while remembering her own loss was taking its toll. The bear looked directly at Clara, and in its eyes she saw a desperate plea for help. The creature wanted to stay, to continue helping these babies, but it was struggling to maintain its invisible state. Clara made a decision that surprised even herself. She stepped closer to Dr. Voss and gently placed a hand on the doctor's arm. "Dr. Voss," she said quietly, "before you make any calls, I need to tell you something. Something you're not going to believe." Dr. Voss looked at her with raised eyebrows. "What is it, Clara?" Clara took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would either make Dr. Voss think she'd lost her mind or open the doctor's eyes to something beyond medical science. "The improvements in these babies aren't coincidental," Clara began. "They're being caused by someone, something, that's been watching over them tonight." Dr. Voss's expression grew skeptical. "Clara, I think the stress of night shifts might be getting to you. Perhaps you should—" Her words were cut off as the rocking chair suddenly became visible to her as well, with the massive bear sitting in it, looking directly at both women with eyes full of ancient wisdom and infinite love. Dr. Voss dropped her phone, and it clattered loudly on the floor. Her face went pale as she stared at the impossible sight before her. "Dear God," she whispered. "What is that?" The bear remained perfectly still in the rocking chair, its massive form now fully visible to both women. Water still dripped from its damp fur, creating small puddles that reflected the fluorescent lights above. The creature's breathing was deep and measured, and its eyes held that same profound sadness that had first struck Clara. Dr. Voss took a step backward, her medical training warring with the impossible reality before her. "This can't be real," she muttered, reaching up to remove her glasses and clean them frantically. "Bears don't just appear in hospitals. They don't sit in rocking chairs like grieving mothers," Clara finished softly. The bear turned its massive head toward Dr. Voss, and something extraordinary happened. The doctor's fear seemed to melt away as she looked into those ancient, pain-filled eyes. She had spent her entire career working with mothers who had lost children or feared losing them. She recognized the expression of maternal grief, even on the face of a wild animal. "You've lost a baby," Dr. Voss said, her voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a question. The bear's response was a low, mournful sound that seemed to come from the depths of its soul. Dr. Voss felt tears spring to her own eyes as she heard in that sound every mother's worst nightmare made real. But their moment of understanding was interrupted by the sound of approaching voices in the hallway. Multiple footsteps, moving quickly. Clara recognized one of the voices. Rebecca Brooks, baby Brooks's mother. She must have decided to return to the hospital earlier than planned. "Oh no," Clara breathed. "The parents." The bear's ears perked up at the sound of the approaching voices. Instead of showing fear or preparing to flee, the creature seemed to become more alert, more focused. It leaned forward in the rocking chair, its gaze fixed on baby Brooks's incubator. "David, I couldn't sleep," Rebecca's voice carried through the door. "I keep thinking about what Dr. Martinez said about the next 24 hours being critical. I need to be with her." "I know," came David Brooks's reply. "I couldn't sleep either. Let's just check on her, and then maybe we can both get some rest." Dr. Voss looked at Clara with panic in her eyes. "What do we do? If they see—" She gestured helplessly at the bear. But the bear was already moving. With surprising grace for such a large creature, it rose from the rocking chair and approached baby Brooks's incubator. The tiny blanket that had been left on the counter began to glow with a soft, warm light that seemed to emanate from within the yarn itself. Clara watched in amazement as the bear gently picked up the glowing blanket and pressed it against the incubator's glass, directly over baby Brooks's tiny form. The baby, who had been sleeping peacefully, suddenly opened her eyes for the first time since her birth. Her tiny face turned toward the bear, and she made a small sound. Not the weak mewing of a premature infant, but something stronger, more aware. The monitors around baby Brooks' incubator began to show readings that defied medical explanation. Her brain activity spiked in patterns typically seen in much older, fully developed children. Her heart rate strengthened to levels that suggested rapid growth and development. Even her physical appearance seemed to change subtly. Her skin took on a healthier pink color, and her breathing became deeper and more regular. "Impossible," Dr. Voss whispered, staring at the monitors. "She's developing at an accelerated rate. Weeks of growth happening in minutes." The door handle turned, and Rebecca and David Brooks entered the NICU. They were both exhausted, wearing the same clothes from the day before, their faces marked by the particular strain that comes from watching a child fight for life. But as they entered, something remarkable happened. The bear didn't disappear or become translucent this time. Instead, it turned to face the parents directly, still holding the glowing blanket against their daughter's incubator. Rebecca stopped dead in her tracks, her hand flying to her mouth. David stood frozen beside her, his eyes wide with disbelief. "There's a bear," Rebecca said, her voice strangely calm. "There's a bear in our daughter's room." But neither parent screamed or ran. Something about the bear's posture, the gentle way it held the tiny blanket, the profound sadness in its eyes, communicated that this was not a threat. David took a tentative step forward. "Why isn't it attacking? Why is it just sitting there?" Clara found her voice. "She's not here to hurt anyone. She's here to help." "She?" Rebecca asked, still staring at the bear. "She lost her own baby," Dr. Voss said quietly, her scientific skepticism giving way to intuitive understanding. "She's trying to save yours." As if responding to their conversation, the bear made that soft rumbling sound again, but this time it was different. It sounded almost like humming, like a lullaby. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, unlike anything any of them had ever heard. Baby Brooks responded to the sound immediately. Her tiny hand pressed against the inside of the incubator's glass, reaching toward the bear. Her eyes, which had been unfocused since birth, tracked the bear's movements with startling clarity. "Look at her monitors," David said, pointing to the displays with shaking hands. "Look at those numbers." Dr. Voss moved closer to check the readings. "Her oxygen saturation is at normal levels. Her heart rate is strong and steady. Her brain activity ... She paused, shaking her head in wonder. "It's showing patterns of rapid neural development. This is medically impossible." The bear's humming grew slightly louder, and the tiny blanket in its paws glowed brighter. Other parents began to arrive, drawn by some inexplicable instinct to check on their children. Mrs. Martinez appeared first, followed by Mr. and Mrs. Chen, then the Williams family. One by one, they entered the NICU and stood in stunned silence as they witnessed the impossible scene. But instead of panic or fear, a strange calm settled over the room. Each parent moved instinctively to their child's incubator and found the same miraculous improvements that baby Brooks was experiencing. The bear's presence seemed to be catalyzing healing in all the premature babies simultaneously. "This is a miracle," whispered Mrs. Martinez, tears streaming down her face as she watched her son's color improve before her eyes. The bear's humming reached a crescendo, and something even more extraordinary occurred. The tiny blanket in its paws began to unravel, but instead of falling apart, the yarn transformed into threads of pure light. These threads flowed from the bear's paws and spread throughout the NICU, touching each incubator with gentle, healing radiance. As the light touched each baby, their conditions improved dramatically. Premature lungs that had struggled to function began working efficiently. Underdeveloped hearts grew stronger with each beat. Fragile nervous systems matured rapidly, bringing clarity to unfocused eyes and strength to weak limbs. Dr. Voss pulled out her tablet and began frantically documenting what she was witnessing. "I have to record this," she said, her hands shaking as she tried to capture the miraculous readings. "No one will believe it otherwise." But as she raised her tablet to photograph the scene, the device malfunctioned. The screen flickered and went black. Every electronic device in the room, phones, cameras, even some of the monitoring equipment, began to fail or display impossible readings. The technology can't process what it's seeing, Clara realized. This is beyond anything our instruments can measure. The bear's humming began to fade, and the threads of light slowly returned to their original form as a tiny blanket. the creature looked exhausted, as if the healing had drained something vital from its own life force. It swayed slightly in its standing position, and Clara instinctively moved forward to steady it. The moment her hand touched the bear's fur, Clara was flooded with visions that took her breath away. She saw the bear in a forest clearing, nurturing a tiny cub with the same brown fur as its mother. She felt the bear's overwhelming love for its baby, the pride and joy of watching the cub take its first steps, the contentment of teaching it to find food and shelter. Then the vision darkened. Clara saw hunters in the forest, heard the crack of gunfire, felt the bear's anguish as it held its wounded cub. She experienced the mother's desperate attempts to save her baby, the long vigil by its side, and finally the unbearable moment when the tiny heart stopped beating. But the visions didn't end there. Clara saw the bear's journey through grief, wandering the forest for days without eating or sleeping. She felt the creature's desperate search for meaning, for some way to transform its pain into something purposeful. And then she saw how the bear had been drawn to the hospital, guided by some force beyond understanding to this place where other mothers' babies fought for life. The bear had somehow learned to channel its maternal love into healing energy, using its own grief as a conduit for miracles. When the visions ended, Clara found herself on her knees beside the bear, tears streaming down her face. She understood now why this creature had appeared, why it had chosen to help these babies. The bear's love for its lost cub had become love for all children in need. The bear looked down at Clara with eyes full of gratitude. Then it turned to each parent in the room, meeting their gazes one by one. In those moments of eye contact, each parent felt a profound sense of connection to this grieving mother who had sacrificed her own peace to save their children. Rebecca Brooks stepped forward, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered to the bear. "Thank you for saving my daughter." The bear's response was a gentle nuzzle against Rebecca's outstretched hand. The touch was warm and comforting, like being embraced by the most understanding friend imaginable. But their moment of connection was interrupted by new sounds from the hallway, urgent footsteps and radio chatter. Hospital security had finally been alerted to the unusual activity in the NICU. "We need to do something," David said urgently. "If security sees her, they'll call animal control. They might hurt her." The bear seemed to understand the approaching danger. It began to move toward the window, but instead of appearing panicked, it moved with resigned dignity. The creature had accomplished what it came to do. The babies were healed, their futures secured. Now it was time to face whatever consequences awaited. But as the bear approached the window, something unexpected happened. Baby Brooks, despite being only hours old and born months premature, let out a strong, clear cry. Not the weak sound of a struggling infant, but the robust cry of a healthy, full-term baby. The sound stopped everyone in the room. Even the approaching security footsteps paused in the hallway. The bear turned back toward Baby Brooks's incubator, and for the first time since it had appeared, Clara saw something other than sadness in its eyes. She saw hope. Baby Brooks's cry echoed through the NICU with a strength that defied everything the medical staff knew about premature infants. The sound was so clear, so vital, that it seemed to breathe new life into the sterile hospital air. But what happened next left everyone speechless. The baby's tiny hand, which had been pressed against the inside of the incubator's glass, began to glow with the same warm light that had emanated from the bear's blanket. The glow spread up her arm, across her chest, illuminating her from within like a tiny beacon of life. "My God," Dr. Voss whispered, watching the monitors as Baby Brooks's readings climbed to levels she had never seen in a premature infant. "She's not just healing, she's evolving." The bear moved closer to the incubator, and as it did, something remarkable began to happen. The creature's own wounds, the scars on its muzzle, the torn ear, the deep scratches along its side, began to fade. The bear's grief was being transformed into something pure and healing, not just for the babies, but for itself as well. Rebecca Brooks pressed her hand against the incubator's glass directly opposite where her daughter's glowing hand lay. The moment their palms aligned through the barrier, Rebecca gasped as she felt a surge of warmth and understanding flow through her. "I can feel what she's feeling," Rebecca said in wonder. "She's not in pain anymore. She's strong." The security footsteps in the hallway grew closer, and Clara could hear voices discussing protocol for dealing with dangerous animals in the hospital. But the bear showed no intention of leaving. Instead, it did something that stunned everyone present. The massive creature began to shrink, not disappearing or fading, but actually becoming smaller, more compact. Its thick brown fur lightened to a softer golden brown, and its features became more delicate, more feminine. Within moments, where the enormous bear had stood, there was now a woman. She appeared to be in her 30s, with long, honey-colored hair that held traces of the bear's earthy scent. Her clothes looked handmade, a simple dress woven from the same brown yarn as the tiny blanket. But her eyes remained unchanged, those same deep, soulful eyes that held infinite love and ancient wisdom. Dr. Voss stumbled backward, her medical mind struggling to process what she had witnessed. "Shape-shifting," she mumbled. "Impossible, absolutely impossible." The woman who had been the bear smiled gently at Dr. Voss. When she spoke, her voice carried the same rumbling undertones as the bear's vocalizations, but softer, more musical. "Nothing is impossible when love guides the way," she said, her accent unlike anything any of them had heard before. It seemed to carry the sound of wind through trees, the babble of forest streams. Clara found her voice first. "Who are you? What are you?" The woman turned to Clara with eyes full of gratitude. "I am Ursa," she said simply. In the old language, it means bear mother. "I am what your people once called a guardian, a protector of children, especially those who fight for life against impossible odds." She moved gracefully to Baby Brooks' incubator, placing both hands on the glass. "I lost my own cub to the cruelty of those who see only threat where there should be wonder. My grief nearly consumed me, but then I heard the cries of these little ones, struggling as my own child once struggled." Rebecca stepped closer to Ursa, no longer afraid. "You saved our daughter. You saved all of them." Ursa's smile was both sad and joyful. "They saved me as well. In healing them, I found purpose beyond my pain." The security radio chatter was getting closer, and David Brooks moved to the door to listen. "They're almost here," he reported, "and they're talking about calling animal control with tranquilizer guns." Ursa nodded calmly. "I know, but there is still work to be done." She moved to the center of the NICU and raised her hands. The remaining threads of light that had touched each incubator began to converge, forming a shimmering web of healing energy that connected all the babies. But this time, the light didn't just heal, it transformed. Each baby in the NICU began to age rapidly, but in a controlled, healthy way. Premature lungs developed fully in minutes. Underdeveloped organs matured to perfect function. Weak bones strengthened and grew. Within the span of a few heartbeats, every premature infant in the unit had developed to the equivalent of a full-term, healthy newborn. Mrs. Martinez gasped as she watched her son, who had been born at just 26 weeks, transform before her eyes into a robust, crying baby. "Miguel," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Look at you, mijo. You're perfect." The Chen family watched in awe as their daughter, who had been fighting infections and breathing difficulties, became a healthy, alert baby with bright, curious eyes. Mr. Williams, who had been preparing for the worst possible news about his son, found himself looking at a thriving infant who reached toward him with strong, steady movements. But the miracle came with a cost. With each baby that reached full health, Ursa grew slightly more translucent, as if the healing was drawing from her very essence. Clara noticed first. "You're fading," she said with growing alarm. "The healing is taking too much from you." Ursa nodded serenely. "All magic requires sacrifice. I have given these children the future that was taken from my own cub. It is a worthy trade." Dr. Voss, who had been documenting everything on paper since the electronic devices failed, looked up from her notes. "There has to be another way. You've given them so much. Surely you deserve to live as well." But their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the NICU door bursting open. 3 security guards rushed in, led by Marcus, the guard Clara had called earlier. Behind them came Dr. Peterson, the chief of pediatrics, looking harried and confused. "Where's the dangerous animal?" Marcus demanded, scanning the room with his hand on his radio. "We got reports of a massive bear threatening patients and staff." Dr. Peterson's eyes went immediately to the monitoring equipment, and his jaw dropped. "Helena, what the hell happened here? These readings are impossible. Every baby in the unit is showing normal development levels." The guards looked around the room suspiciously, seeing only medical staff and worried parents. Ursa had become almost completely transparent, visible only to those who had witnessed her transformation. "There was no dangerous animal," Rebecca Brooks said firmly, moving to stand protectively near where Ursa's fading form sat beside her daughter's incubator. "There was only a miracle." Marcus looked confused. "Ma'am, we had multiple reports of a large bear in this unit. The caller was very specific." Clara stepped forward. "I made that call, and I was mistaken. It was just shadows and stress. Night shifts can play tricks on your mind." Dr. Peterson moved from incubator to incubator, checking each baby with growing amazement. "This is medically impossible," he muttered. "These children were all critically premature just hours ago. Now they're showing development levels of full-term infants." Ursa, now barely visible, leaned close to Baby Brooks's incubator one last time. She whispered something in that ancient language, and the baby turned her head toward the sound, her bright eyes seeming to focus directly on Ursa's fading face. "Remember," Ursa whispered, her voice like wind through leaves. "Remember that love conquered fear, that sacrifice brought life, that hope is stronger than despair." Baby Brooks made a soft cooing sound, as if she understood every word. But as Ursa prepared to fade completely away, something unexpected happened. All the babies in the NICU began to cry at once, not cries of distress, but strong, healthy cries that seemed to call out to their mysterious guardian. The sound of their voices, full of life and strength, acted like an anchor. Ursa's fading form began to solidify again, color returning to her translucent features. "The children," she said in wonder. "They're calling me back." Dr. Voss, who had been watching the entire scene with scientific fascination, suddenly understood. "They're sharing their life force with you, just as you shared yours with them." The web of light that connected all the incubators pulsed brighter, and energy began flowing back toward Ursa, not taking from the babies, but sharing the abundant life and health she had given them. Each child was so strong now, so vital, that they could spare some of that energy to save their savior. Marcus and the other security guards looked around the room in confusion. They could see the effects of whatever had happened. the dramatically improved babies, the emotional parents, the awed medical staff. But they couldn't see the cause. "I don't understand what's going on here," Marcus said slowly. "But if there's no immediate danger, maybe we should let the medical staff handle this." Dr. Peterson was still moving from baby to baby, his scientific mind reeling. "I need to call in specialists, geneticists, developmental biologists, neurologists. This level of accelerated development should be impossible without severe complications, but these children are perfect. More than perfect, they're thriving." As Ursa regained her solid form, she looked around the room at all the families she had helped. Each parent's face showed a mixture of gratitude, wonder, and protective love for this mysterious woman who had saved their children. "You can't stay here," David Brooks said quietly. "Too many people will ask questions. They'll want to study you, test you." Ursa nodded sadly. "I know, but I wanted to see them one more time, to know that they will truly be safe." Mrs. Chen stepped forward, her newborn daughter cradled in her arms. The baby, who hours ago had been fighting for life, was now alert and healthy, looking around with bright, curious eyes. "What can we do for you?" Mrs. Chen asked. "You've given us everything. How can we possibly repay such a gift?" Ursa's smile was radiant. "Live," she said simply. "Love your children. Protect them. Teach them that the world is full of both wonder and sorrow, but that love always has the power to heal." She moved to each family in turn, gently touching each baby's forehead with a fingertip. As she did, she whispered blessings in that ancient language, and each child's eyes seemed to brighten with understanding beyond their age. When she reached Baby Brooks, Ursa paused longer. The tiny girl, now strong and healthy, reached up with one perfect little hand and grasped Ursa's finger with surprising strength. "This one will be special," Ursa said to Rebecca and David. "She has felt the touch of old magic, the power of love that transcends the boundaries between worlds. She will grow up knowing that miracles are real, that hope is never lost." But as touching as the moment was, the sound of more approaching footsteps reminded everyone that time was running short. Word of the miraculous healings was spreading through the hospital, and soon the NICU would be flooded with doctors, researchers, and administrators demanding explanations. "You need to go," Clara said urgently. "How will you get out without being seen?" Ursa laughed, a sound like water over stones. "The same way I got in. There are paths between the worlds that most people cannot see, doors that open only for those who carry love in their hearts." She moved toward the window, but instead of opening it or breaking the glass, she simply stepped forward and passed through it, as if it were made of mist. For a moment, she stood on the other side, visible through the transparent barrier. She raised one hand in farewell, and as she did, every electronic device in the NICU suddenly sprang back to life. Monitors began displaying the baby's remarkable vital signs, phones started working again, and Dr. Voss's tablet lit up with perfect documentation of the healed children. "So you'll be remembered," Ursa said, her voice somehow carrying clearly through the glass. "So the world will know that miracles still happen." Then she began to walk across the air itself, stepping on invisible paths that led toward the forest beyond the parking lot. The families watched in silent awe as their guardian angel disappeared into the darkness between the trees. But just before she vanished completely, something wonderful happened. A small figure emerged from the forest to meet her. A young bear cub with golden brown fur, healthy and whole. Clara gasped, recognizing the cub from her visions. "Her baby," she whispered. "Her own baby is alive." Ursa knelt and embraced the cub, and the sound of their reunion, part human laughter, part bear rumble, drifted back to the hospital on the night wind. The greatest miracle of all wasn't just that she had saved the human babies, but that in doing so, she had earned back her own child's life. As mother and cub disappeared into the forest together, every baby in the NICU settled into peaceful, healthy sleep. Their miracle was complete, their futures secured by a love so powerful it had bridged worlds and conquered death itself. But the story was far from over. In the days that followed, word of the miraculous healings spread throughout the medical community like wildfire. Dr. Peterson found himself fielding calls from researchers around the world, all demanding to know how an entire NICU of critically premature infants had suddenly developed into perfectly healthy babies overnight. Clara returned to work 3 nights later, still processing everything she had witnessed. The NICU felt different now. There was a warmth in the air that hadn't been there before, a sense of hope that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The rocking chair in the corner remained, but now it held a different energy. Sometimes Clara would catch it moving gently on its own, as if Ursa's presence had left an permanent imprint. Dr. Voss had become obsessed with documenting every detail of what had happened. Her office was filled with charts, graphs, and medical reports that told an impossible story. The babies weren't just healthy, they were extraordinarily advanced. Their cognitive development, immune systems, and physical coordination were far beyond what any medical textbook said was possible. "It's as if they've been blessed," Dr. Voss told Clara during a quiet moment between rounds. "Their DNA shows markers I've never seen before, genetic expressions that should take years to develop." But the most remarkable change was in baby Brooks. Rebecca and David had taken their daughter home after just 1 week, something that should have been impossible for a baby born so prematurely. But little Sarah Brooks, as they had named her, was thriving beyond all expectations. Clara had visited the Brooks family at their home on her day off, bringing the tiny knitted blanket that Ursa had left behind. Rebecca had cried when she saw it, remembering the bear's gentle sacrifice. "She saved our daughter's life," Rebecca had said, cradling Sarah in her arms. "How do we even begin to thank someone for that?" But as Clara held little Sarah, she noticed something that made her breath catch. The baby's eyes, which had been a normal brown at birth, now held flecks of gold that seemed to shimmer in certain light. And when Sarah looked at Clara, there was an intelligence there that seemed far beyond her weeks of life. "She's different, isn't she?" David had asked quietly, noticing Clara's expression. Clara nodded slowly. "They all are. Ursa didn't just heal them, she changed them somehow, made them more than they were before." Over the following weeks, similar reports began coming in from the other families. Miguel Martinez was speaking his first words at just 2 months old. The Chen baby was crawling and showing problem-solving abilities that amazed her pediatrician. Baby Williams had developed an unusual affinity for animals. Cats and dogs were drawn to him, and he seemed to understand their behaviors in ways that shouldn't be possible for an infant. But it was Sarah Brooks who showed the most extraordinary developments. At 3 months old, she was not only walking, but moving with a grace that reminded Clara eerily of Ursa's fluid movements. More concerning, Sarah seemed to be able to sense things that others couldn't. Rebecca had called Clara in a panic one evening. "She keeps looking at the window and making sounds," Rebecca had said. "Not baby sounds, something else. And when I look where she's looking, I swear I can see shapes moving in the trees." Clara had rushed over to find Sarah standing in her crib, reaching toward the window with both arms. Outside, the edge of Millbrook Forest was visible in the distance. As Clara watched, Sarah made a series of sounds that were unmistakably similar to bear vocalizations, rumbles and huffs that no human baby should be able to produce. "She's calling to Ursa," Clara realized with growing amazement. "Somehow, she's maintaining a connection." That night, as if summoned by Sarah's calls, Ursa appeared at the Brooks window. Not as the massive bear this time, but in her human form, glowing softly in the moonlight. She pressed her hand against the glass, and Sarah immediately calmed, making soft cooing sounds as she reached back. Rebecca and David had watched in silent awe as their daughter and the mysterious guardian communicated without words. Ursa's expression was one of maternal pride mixed with concern. "She's growing too fast," Ursa said, her voice somehow carrying through the glass. "The magic I used to save her. It's accelerating her development beyond what's safe." Clara, who had been called over immediately, felt a chill of fear. "What does that mean? Is she in danger?" Ursa's expression grew troubled. "All magic has consequences. I saved these children by giving them a part of my essence, my connection to the old ways. But Sarah received more than the others. She was the first I touched, and she was closest to death. The magic in her is stronger, more volatile." David stepped forward, his voice tight with worry. "What will happen to her?" "She will continue to develop at an accelerated pace," Ursa explained. "Physically, mentally, spiritually. She may age years in the span of months. And as she grows, she will develop abilities that human children are not meant to have." Rebecca clutched Sarah tighter. "There has to be something you can do, some way to slow it down." Ursa was quiet for a long moment, her golden eyes reflecting the moonlight. "There is one way," she said finally, "but it would require a sacrifice that I am not sure any of us are prepared to make." Clara's heart sank. "What kind of sacrifice?" "The magic would need to be redistributed," Ursa explained, "spread among all the children I healed, rather than concentrated in Sarah alone. But doing so would require me to touch each child again, to weave their destinies together in a way that cannot be undone." "What does that mean exactly?" David asked. Ursa's expression grew grave. "It would mean that all the children would be connected for life. They would share not just the magic, but each other's experiences, emotions, even thoughts to some degree. They would become something like siblings in spirit, bound together by forces beyond normal human understanding." Rebecca looked down at Sarah, who was listening to every word with an intelligence that was heartbreaking in one so young. "And if we don't do this, if we leave things as they are, Sarah will continue to accelerate. She may live a full life, but it will be compressed into a few short years. And as her abilities grow stronger, she will become isolated from normal human existence. She will be powerful, but profoundly alone." The weight of the choice settled over them like a heavy blanket. Clara could see the anguish in Rebecca and David's faces as they struggled with an impossible decision. "We need to talk to the other families," Rebecca said finally. "This affects all the children. They deserve to know what's happening and have a say in what comes next." Over the next few days, Clara helped arrange a meeting of all the families whose children had been healed by Ursa. They gathered at the Brooks home on a quiet Sunday evening, bringing their remarkable babies with them. The children, despite their young age, seemed to sense the importance of the gathering. They were unusually calm and alert, their bright eyes tracking the adult conversation with uncanny understanding. Dr. Voss attended as well, bringing detailed medical reports that documented the extraordinary development each child was showing. "I've been tracking their progress," she said, spreading charts across the Brooks dining table. "The accelerated development is consistent across all of them, but Sarah's readings are off the charts." Mrs. Martinez spoke first. "Miguel has been having dreams," she said quietly. "He describes places he's never been, animals he's never seen. And sometimes when he's sleeping, I swear I hear him making the same sounds Sarah makes, those bear sounds." The Chen family nodded in agreement. Lily does the same thing, Mrs. Chen added. And yesterday she pointed to a photo of Sarah in the newspaper and said, "Sister, clear as day. She's only 4 months old, she shouldn't even know that word." Mr. Williams shared that his son had begun showing an almost supernatural connection to nature. Birds land on his stroller when we're outside. Squirrels come right up to him. It's like they recognize something in him. As the families shared their experiences, a pattern emerged. All the children were developing beyond normal parameters. All were showing signs of connection to each other and to Ursa, and all were displaying abilities that defied medical explanation. "The question is," Dr. Voss said, looking around the room, "what do we do about it?" Clara had been thinking about this for days. Ursa said the magic could be redistributed among all the children. That would slow Sarah's development to a safer pace, but it would bind all of them together permanently. "What exactly would that mean for their futures?" David asked. Dr. Voss consulted her notes. "Based on what I've observed, they would likely grow up with enhanced abilities, superior intelligence, physical capabilities, possibly even some form of telepathic connection. But they would also be different from other children in ways that might make normal social integration difficult." Rebecca looked around at the other parents. Or they could grow up together, understanding each other in ways that no one else could. They could be each other's support system. The room fell quiet as each family considered the implications. These children had already been given an extraordinary gift, the gift of life itself. Now they were being asked to choose between two very different paths for their children's futures. Mrs. Martinez broke the silence. "If we don't do this, Sarah could die young, right? From the acceleration?" Clara nodded reluctantly. "That's what Ursa seemed to indicate." "Then I don't see that we have much choice," Mrs. Martinez continued. "These children saved each other once already, when they shared their energy to bring Ursa back. Maybe they're meant to be connected." One by one, the other families began to voice their agreement. The children themselves seemed to respond to the decision, becoming more animated and reaching toward each other across the room. "There's something else to consider, Doctor," Voss said quietly. "If we go through with this, these children will likely develop abilities that will attract attention as they grow older. Scientists, government agencies, people who might want to study them or use them. We would need to be prepared to protect them." David looked around the room at the other families. "Then we protect them together, all of us." Rebecca nodded firmly. "We become more than just families who shared a miracle. We become a community dedicated to keeping these children safe and helping them understand their gifts." As if sensing the decision that was forming, little Sarah made a series of soft sounds that the other babies immediately responded to. Within moments, all the children were talking to each other in that strange language of rumbles and coos that seemed to bridge the gap between human and animal communication. "They're already connected," Clara observed with wonder. "They're already choosing each other." The decision was made. Clara would contact Ursa and arrange for the ritual that would bind the children's destinies together. But none of them were prepared for what would happen when Ursa returned to complete the magic she had begun. 2 nights later, as a full moon rose over Millbrook Forest, Ursa appeared not at the window, but in the brook's backyard. She was accompanied by her cub, now grown larger and stronger, and something else that made everyone gasp in amazement. Following behind them was a procession of forest animals: deer, rabbits, foxes, even a family of raccoons. They moved in perfect formation, as if participating in some ancient ceremony that predated human memory. "The forest sends its blessing," Ursa explained, as the families gathered in the backyard with their babies. "These children will be guardians of the balance between the human world and the natural world. The animals recognize this and come to witness their binding. Clara looked around at the incredible scene. 7 families with their miraculous babies, a shape-shifting guardian and her cub, and a gathering of wild animals that showed no fear of the humans present. It felt like stepping into a fairy tale. "Are you ready?" Ursa asked, looking at each parent in turn. Rebecca spoke for all of them. "We're ready." What happened next would bond not just the children, but their families, in ways none of them could have imagined. And it would set in motion events that would eventually change the world's understanding of what was possible when love transcended the boundaries between species, between the natural and supernatural worlds. Ursa began to glow with that same warm light that had first healed the babies in the NICU. But this time, the light was different, deeper, more complex, shot through with threads of silver and gold that seemed to connect not just to the children, but to the very fabric of life itself. "This binding cannot be undone," Ursa warned one final time. "Are you certain this is what you choose for your children?" All 7 families answered as one. Yes. And with that word, the true magic began. Ursa raised her hands to the star-filled sky, and the light emanating from her body intensified until it illuminated the entire backyard like daylight. The 7 babies, held securely in their parents' arms, began to glow as well, each child radiating a different color that seemed to reflect their unique spirit. Sarah Brooks glowed with warm amber light, like sunlight through honey. Miguel Martinez radiated deep emerald green, the color of new growth. Lily Chen shimmered with silver blue, like moonlight on water. Baby Williams pulsed with rich gold, warm as summer wheat. The other 3 children, Emma Thompson, James Sullivan, and Grace Kim, glowed with colors that had no earthly names, hues that existed only in the space between dreams and reality. As the light from each child grew stronger, thin threads of luminous energy began to stretch between them, weaving an intricate pattern that connected each baby to all the others. The threads sparkled and danced in the air, creating a web of light that pulsed with the rhythm of 7 tiny heartbeats, gradually synchronizing until they beat as one. The forest animals moved closer, forming a perfect circle around the families. Clara watched in awe as deer lowered their heads in what could only be described as reverence. Foxes sat with their tails wrapped around their paws like honored guests at a sacred ceremony. Even the raccoons, usually mischievous and chaotic, maintained perfect stillness. Ursa's cub approached Sarah Brooks, who reached out her tiny hand. When their fingers touched, a surge of pure love and understanding passed between them. In that moment, Sarah's dangerous acceleration began to slow, the excess magic flowing along the threads of light to her connected siblings. "From this night forward," Ursa intoned, her voice carrying the weight of ancient promises, "these 7 souls are bound by more than blood or chance. They are bound by the very essence of life itself, connected in purpose and protected by powers that predate human memory." The threads of light began to sink into each child's skin, not disappearing but becoming part of them, a permanent network of connection that would link them always. As the light settled, each baby's glow softened to a gentle warmth that only those who truly looked could see. Rebecca felt Sarah relax in her arms, her breathing becoming peaceful and normal for the first time in weeks. Around the circle, the other parents reported the same thing. Their children had found balance. "What happens now?" David asked, his voice filled with wonder and just a touch of apprehension. Ursa smiled, and for the first time since Clara had met her, the guardian's expression held no trace of sadness. "Now they grow," she said simply. "But they grow together, sharing strength when one is weak, sharing joy when another needs comfort. sharing wisdom as they discover what they are meant to become. Dr. Voss, who had been documenting everything with an old-fashioned notebook since electronics still failed around Ursa, looked up from her frantic scribbling. Will they be normal children? Will they be able to have normal lives? Define normal, Ursa said with a gentle laugh. They will go to school, make friends, fall in love, choose careers, but they will also see beauty where others see only ordinary things. They will sense pain in others and feel compelled to heal it. They will understand that the barrier between the human world and the natural world is thinner than most people believe. She gestured to the forest animals still surrounding them. And they will never be alone. The guardians of earth and sky, forest and stream will always know where to find them. Mrs. Martinez stepped forward, Miguel sleeping peacefully in her arms. How will we explain this to them as they grow up? How do we help them understand what they are? Tell them the truth, Ursa replied. Tell them that love conquered death, that sacrifice created miracles, that 7 tiny fighters were saved by a mother's grief transformed into hope. Tell them that they are living proof that magic exists in the world for those brave enough to believe in it. She turned to Clara, who had been quietly crying tears of joy throughout the entire ceremony. And you, faithful guardian of the Night Watch, will you help guide them? Clara wiped her eyes and nodded firmly. For as long as they need me. Ursa reached into her dress and withdrew 7 small items, polished stones that seemed to hold starlight within their depths. She gave one to each family. When the children are old enough, give them these, she instructed. The stones will help them understand their connection to each other and to the natural world, and if they are ever in great danger, the stones will call me back. As she spoke, the forest animals began to disperse, fading back into the shadows with satisfied rumbles and gentle sounds. Their blessing had been given, their witness complete. Ursa's cub nuzzled against her side, and she knelt to embrace him. We must go now, she said, looking around at the families one last time. But we are never truly gone. Every sunset, every dawn, every moment when you see your children laugh with pure joy, we are there. She stood and began to walk toward the forest, but paused at the edge of the yard. One more thing, she called back. The rocking chair in the NICU, let it remain. Sometimes other mothers will need to know that miracles are possible. With that, Ursa and her cub stepped into the shadows between the trees and vanished, leaving behind only the faint scent of pine and wildflowers. The 7 families stood in silence for a long moment, holding their miraculous children under the starlight. These babies had been saved by forces beyond understanding, bonded by magic older than civilization, and blessed by the wild heart of the world itself. Clara looked around at each family, the Brookses, the Martinezes, the Chens, the Williamses, the Thompsons, the Sullivans, and the Kims. These children would grow up knowing they were loved not just by their parents, but by the very forces of life itself. What do we do now? Rebecca asked softly, voicing what they were all thinking. David Brooks, still holding his daughter close, smiled as he answered. Now we go home. We watch them grow. We help them understand their gifts, and we make sure the world is ready for 7 very special children who prove that miracles are real. Dr. Voss closed her notebook and looked up at the stars. I'm going to need to rewrite medical textbooks, she said with a chuckle. As the families began to gather their things and prepare to leave, Sarah Brooks opened her eyes one last time that night. For just a moment, her gaze was drawn to the forest where Ursa had disappeared. She made one soft sound, not quite human, not quite animal, but something that bridged both worlds. From somewhere deep in the woods came an answering call, gentle and loving. carrying on the night wind like a lullaby. It was a promise that echoed in the hearts of all who heard it. Love endures. Hope prevails. Miracles are always possible. And in the neonatal intensive care unit of St. Mary's Children's Hospital, an old wooden rocking chair moved gently back and forth, empty but never abandoned, waiting for the next mother who would need to believe that impossible things could happen when love showed the way. The 7 children would grow up to change the world, each in their own way, forever connected by the magic of a grieving mother bear who learned that the greatest healing comes not from taking away pain, but from transforming it into hope for others. Their story became legend, whispered among night nurses and told to families facing impossible odds. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the need was greatest and hearts were open enough to believe, Ursa would return to rock another chair, to hold another vigil, to prove once again that love truly can conquer all.